me ask you something. Think back to the early or mid stage in your career, or maybe think about where you are right now if you're in it, and ask yourself honestly, what were or are you focused on? And for most people, the answer is some version of doing good work, doing great work, learning fast, proving I can handle it, staying out of trouble, and making a strong impression. And all of that is really good. All of that matters. But what almost nobody tells you at those stages in your career, it's the thing I wish someone had told me and told me earlier, and the thing I tell almost every early or mid career professional that I coach, credibility starts forming way before you think it does. Not after you've been promoted, not after you've led a team or delivered a major project or earned a seat at the bigger table. Now, in the small moments, in the way you show up, in a routine meeting, in whether you followed up on the thing you said you were going to follow up on, in how you handle it when something goes sideways and everyone's watching to see what you do. People are forming impressions of you. And they're doing it constantly. They're doing it just kind of quietly, often without even thinking about it themselves. And those impressions are answering a very specific question. It's not just, is this person good at their job? It's, would I trust this person with something bigger? And that's the question that credibility answers. And the answer is being written right now in your daily behavior, whether you're intentional about it or not. So that's what this episode is about. Let's get to it. Before we talk about what builds credibility, I want to talk about the most common mistake that I see ambitious professionals make. It's certainly not laziness and it's not arrogance. It's actually something that makes complete logical sense, and it's still wrong. The mistake is believing that exceptional work is enough. And I talk about this a lot on the podcast. It's the thinking that goes, if I do brilliant work, people will notice, and trust will follow, and opportunities will open up. And look, I understand why people believe this. It is such a reasonable hypothesis. It worked in school, and it's been reinforced by every performance review that focused on output. But credibility is not the same thing as competence, and conflating them is where a lot of talented people stall. Competence answers the question, can you do the work? Whereas credibility answers something harder and more human, actually. Can I trust how you work? Can I trust how you think and how you show up? And you can score so high on the first question while quietly losing points on the second question. And you never even know it because nobody sits you down and says, your spreadsheet was excellent, but your credibility is leaking. Here's what it looks like in practice. Great work, but poor follow through on small commitments. Smart ideas in meetings, but communicated in a way that's hard to follow. Strong execution on the actual deliverable, but emotional inconsistency when things get pressured. Tremendous talent, but no one quite knows how to trust you with something bigger because the small trust signals aren't there yet. I had a client. She was earlier in her career. She was in financial services, very brilliant. And her analysis was some of the sharpest that I'd seen at her level. Her work ethic was not in question, but there were patterns. Small deliverables were sometimes late, not the big ones, the small ones. In meetings, she would over-explain her thinking in a way that actually made her sound less certain rather than more certain. And when the pressure was on, when a client got difficult or a deadline got moved, you could see it on her face and you could hear it in her voice. And leadership's perception, which she didn't know about until I had the opportunity to tell her, was she's very smart, she's not quite ready. And it wasn't because she was not capable. She had capabilities in abundance, but her credibility was leaking through the behavioral patterns that surrounded the work. So here's the line I want you to carry with you from this section. Early credibility and mid-career credibility, it's less about brilliance. It's really about predictability. Can people predict how you will show up? Can they trust the pattern of your behavior, not just the quality of your output when you're at your best. That's what they're actually evaluating, and that's what we're going to build. Now, I want to share something that genuinely surprised me when I came across it, because it reframes the stakes of early career and mid-career in a way that I think is important to hear. Researchers at Princeton University set out to study how quickly people form judgments about others. They knew that first impressions form fast. We all know that. That part's not surprising. What they wanted to know was how fast. And more importantly, how accurate are those fast judgments compared to ones formed with more time? So they showed participants photographs of strangers for varying lengths of time, 1/10 of a second, half a second, a full second, and then they asked them to rate the strangers on traits like competence, trustworthiness, likability. And what they found was, and this is the part that stopped me, the judgments formed in 1/10 of a second were highly consistent with the judgments formed after a full second of viewing. More time did not dramatically change the conclusions. The brain had already decided. But the more striking finding came when they compared these rapid judgments to real-world outcomes. Researcher Alexander Todorov found that judgments of competence made from a single glance at a political candidate's face predicted the winner of U.S. congressional elections with about 70% accuracy. 70% from a glance. Now, this does not mean that first impressions are always right or that they can't be overcome. They absolutely can. Research published in the Consulting Psychology Journal found that while initial impressions carry significant weight, long-term credibility is ultimately built through consistency and values in action over time. What do you do repeatedly and not just once? But here's why the first impression research matters. It tells you that the margin for "I'll make a better impression later" is narrower than most people assume. You don't get a blank slate every time. You get impressions that compound, for better or for worse. And the earlier you're intentional about what you're signaling, the more runway you have to build something really solid. So, what actually builds early leadership credibility? In my experience coaching professionals at every stage, it comes down to 4 pillars. None of them, I have to say, are glamorous. All of them are learnable, which is the good part. Together, they create what I think of as a trusted architecture, the structural foundation that makes people feel safe betting on you. So let's go through them. The first pillar is reliability. This is the most foundational, and it's also the most underestimated because it sounds so obvious. Do what you say you'll do. Of course, everyone knows that, except most people aren't actually doing it consistently. Not on the big things, on the small things. The email you'd said that you'd send by end of day, the document you said you'd review before the meeting, the follow-up that you promised and then forgot because something else came up. Now, in isolation, each of those is minor. Accumulated over months, they form a pattern. And the pattern teaches people something, either that you can be relied upon without checking, or that you need to be followed up with. Here's the phrase that I use with clients. Reliability builds reputational compound interest. Every small commitment honored, it's a deposit. Every dropped ball, that's a withdrawal. And at the beginning of your career, your account is brand new. The balance matters more, not less, because you haven't built up enough credit yet to absorb the withdrawals without notice. The practical version of this is simple. Only make commitments that you can keep. And when something genuinely cannot be delivered on time, don't go quiet. Proactively reset the expectation before the deadline, not after. Just that alone, the proactive reset, is a credibility signal that most early career professionals and mid-career professionals don't follow, or perhaps haven't learned. It says, I'm tracking this. I'm on it. You don't have to chase me. This second pillar is professional presence. And it's something we talk about a lot on the podcast. And again, it's something that everyone agrees upon, and yet most people do not do well. And I want to be very careful here because presence it's one of those words that gets used a lot, and it means different things to different people. So I'll be specific here. I'm not talking about charisma when I mention presence. I'm not talking about dominance. I'm certainly not talking about being the loudest or the most confident sounding person in the room. What I'm talking about with presence is steadiness, it's clarity, it's composure, it's the quality of engagement that you bring to an interaction. Think about the people in your career who've had the strongest professional presence, the ones who felt truly credible, pretty immediately credible, whose opinions carried weight, who made you feel like the conversation was in good hands. And I'd bet that most of them weren't necessarily the loudest, they were the most settled. Research on executive presence, including work published through the Center for Talent Innovation, identifies projected confidence, communication clarity, and interpersonal integrity as the strongest contributors to how leaders are perceived. And notably, all three of those are behavioral. They're not traits that you're born with. They are things that you practice. So what does this look like in the earlier stages? It's speaking up clearly and speaking at a pace that sends a signal that you're not rushing. It's entering meetings prepared, not just knowing the content, but having thought about what you want to contribute. It's asking one sharp, thoughtful question rather than filling silence with several half-formed comments, questions, ums, ahs. It's keeping your calm and keeping it visibly when someone challenges your idea. You're not shutting down, you're not over-explaining, you're just holding your ground with composure. And there's a metaphor I use for this that I think captures it well. Presence is your professional trailer before people have seen the full movie. The trailer is short, it's selective, and it shapes whether people decide, do they want to see more? Every early interaction is a trailer. So what is your early interaction advertising? The third pillar is sound judgment. And this is where it gets interesting because this is the pillar that most distinguishes people who rise quickly from the people who stay in execution mode for too long in their careers. High performers execute. They do the work well. Rising leaders go on and they interpret. They tell you what that work means. So what does that mean? Here's the shift in practice. The old pattern is you encounter a problem or a decision point and you bring it to your manager and you say, I'm not sure what to do here. What do you think I should do? The new pattern is you encounter the same problem, you think it through, you bring it to your manager with options, you say, I've looked at this, and here are two ways we could approach it. I recommend this one, here's why, but I wanted to get your read before I move. It's the same situation, but you're sending a totally different signal. The first one says, I need direction, and the second one says, I can think for myself. I respect your judgment, and I'm ready to be trusted with more. This matters so much because leadership pipeline research, including work done by Ram Charan and colleagues on leadership transitions, consistently shows the move from individual contributor to leader requires a fundamental shift in how you think, not just what you produce, but the altitude at which you're operating. And you thinking about your task, or are you? Are you thinking about your task, or are you thinking about what your task means for them, or the client, or the quarter? You don't have to wait for a promotion to start thinking at that altitude. You can do it right now. And when you do, people notice. The fourth pillar is ownership. And this is the one that I think has the most immediate impact on how you're perceived, and the one that's most clearly demonstrated through language. Ownership sounds like, I'll handle it. Here's my recommendation. I noticed this risk and wanted to flag it early. I've already started thinking about how we'd solve this. Ownership definitely does not sound like, I wasn't sure what you wanted. No one told me that was part of my role. I thought someone else was taking care of that. The difference is not about who's actually responsible in an organizational sense. It's about the posture you bring to every situation. A posture that says, I am someone who moves towards problems, not away from them. I'm someone who brings solutions, not just observations. I'm someone you don't have to worry about. And that last phrase, someone you don't have to worry about, that came from a client story that I think about a lot. This client was a few years into her career, so smart, ambitious, and genuinely capable. She made one specific habit shift after a coaching session. Before she brought a problem to her manager, she would spend 10 minutes thinking through possible solutions first. Not to pretend she had all the answers, because of course she didn't always, but to arrive with something, to come with a first attempt, a hypothesis, two options, even if she wasn't sure which one was right. And sure enough, a few months into this habit, her manager pulled her aside and said, you've become someone I worry about less. And she called me after the meeting, and I could hear in her voice that she knew exactly what it meant. Not, I don't think about you, but I've stopped spending mental energy wondering if things are going to be handled because I know they are. And that is leadership gold. That is what ownership builds. For years, organizational psychologists have been trying to understand what actually drives long-term career advancement. And the intuitive assumption most people carry is that it's about peak performance, the big win, the standout project, that impressive moment that you put in. So research began to study it more rigorously, and they tracked professionals over time and measuring performance and advancement and how they were perceived by senior leaders. And they specifically wanted to understand, is it the peak moments that drive perception, or is it something else? And what they found flipped the assumption. It wasn't the peaks that most reliably predicted how leaders were perceived and advanced. It was behavioral consistency, the degree to which someone showed up the same way, day after day, regardless of stakes or visibility. The people who were seen as most leadership ready were not necessarily the ones who had the most impressive moments. They were the ones whose managers could finish the sentence without hesitation. I know exactly how this person will handle it. Predictability, it turns out, is not the enemy of exceptional. It's the foundation of trust. And trust is what makes exceptional actually matter. Because when people trust you, they give you the opportunities to be exceptional in bigger rooms. High performers tend to optimize for their best day. Leaders, high performers who are leaders, optimize for their worst day because that's the day that reveals character. That's the day that the people are watching most carefully. And that's the day that either confirms or questions every positive impression that came before it. This brings me to the section of the episode that I think is most practically useful because everything we've talked about lives or dies in what you do daily, not in one big moment, in the pattern. There are behaviors that quietly strengthen credibility over time, and there are behaviors that quietly leak it. And most of the time, neither the strengthening nor the leaking is dramatic. It is, as we've talked about, cumulative. The behaviors that build are this: showing up prepared, following through without being chased, communicating with clarity, not volume, regulating your emotions when the pressure rises, taking initiative before you're asked, showing up consistently, not brilliantly once and then ordinarily for a month. The behaviors that erode it are excuses, even legitimate ones, when you offer those excuses instead of offering solutions, or overpromising and underdelivering, or emotional volatility when things get hard, sloppiness on the small things because you're focused on the big things, passive communication, waiting, hedging, half committing, avoidance of anything, of difficult conversations, of uncertain situations, of anything that might expose a gap. And here's the line I want you to hold from this whole episode. Your reputation is rarely shaped by one dramatic moment. It's shaped by repeated patterns, which is actually great news because it means that credibility is not something that happens to you. It's something that you build. You build it deliberately. You build it incrementally. You build it one daily behavior at a time. And the earlier you understand that, the more runway you have. So let me bring this home. Early leadership credibility is not about pretending to be senior. It's not about performing confidence that you don't feel or claiming expertise that you haven't yet built or trying to seem ready before you have. It's so much simpler and actually harder than that. It's about becoming someone people increasingly trust. Someone who does what they say they'll do, who brings judgment, not just execution, who owns outcomes rather than just explaining the gaps, who shows up with steadiness in the room when it's tough. Because here's what I've seen in my coaching practice again and again. People don't promote competence alone. They promote confidence in competence. And that confidence is what credibility provides. When your manager thinks of you, what do they feel? Do they feel relief? Do they feel uncertainty? Do they feel trust? Do they feel a vague sense that they should check in more often? Those feelings, those are built by your daily patterns. They're built by those four pillars: reliability, presence, judgment, ownership. And they start forming earlier than most people think, which means the investment you make right now at this stage, it compounds. So I'll leave you with this. I worked with a client who told me something that stuck with me. She said, I spent the first 3 years of my career trying to be impressive. And then I realized that the people who were advancing weren't trying to be impressive, and they certainly weren't the most impressive. They were the most trusted. And I had no idea that those were different things. She figured it out, and she moved fast once she did. The leaders who rise are the ones who understand that credibility isn't the destination, it's the vehicle, and it's what carries everything else. So build it now. Build it in the small moments. Build it in the way you handle the Tuesday afternoon meeting when no one senior is watching. Because leadership does not begin with the title. It begins with the trust, and the trust begins right now. So here's your question for this week. Just one. I want you to sit with it. What are my daily behaviors teaching people about me? Are they learning that you're reliable? Are they learning that you think clearly, that you're ready for more? Or are there small leaks, patterns that you've been aware of but haven't addressed that are quietly eroding that credibility that you're working so hard to build in other ways? Pick one of the pillars from today, just one: reliability or presence or judgment or ownership, and ask yourself, what's one specific thing that I can do differently this week to strengthen it? Because credibility is not built someday. It's built in the decisions you make today, this week, in the interactions you have tomorrow, in whether you follow through on the small thing that you said you'd do. Leadership begins long before the title does, and so does the work of earning it. I'll see you in the next episode.